It's time now for the award-winning #1 local talk show in Northeast Pennsylvania, The Sam Lesante Show. Now here's your host, Sam Lesante.
So my friends, you see him every night at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and 11 o'clock. Yes, you see him on WNEP. He's a news anchor. Scott Schaffer is here today. Folks, we're going to learn about the real Scott Schaffer. Will the real Scott Schaffer please stand up?
Yeah,
hey, Scott, thanks for come on the show. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Seriously.
You know, I told you I had Tom on the show, and it was an interesting conversation as to what you do. First of all, congratulations to you and the WNEP team for the success that you've had throughout the years. And not only that, I think it's very admirable that what a WNEP gives back into the community. I mean, with the telethons, I mean, not, but all the things that you guys do, okay, the St. Joseph's Hospital, the runs, etc. I think it's great, you know.
Well, we are very involved in the community, and I think that's very important for any kind of public entity that we are. Obviously a private company, but in the public eye, it's important to get involved in the community, and the market that we serve is so big, you know, that there's so many worthwhile opportunities to get involved, and you know, we try to do as much as we can.
You know, Scott, when we look at the news, okay, and I want to touch a couple things, you know, your personal opinions on some of the things that we're involved with. Mostly you. I do a talk show because we have local news, which covers a specific area, but 16 covers a vast area. But the other thing is a tribute to you people being like top 3 in the country in the United States, okay? So that doesn't happen overnight, okay? Your news director, I think, is second to none. I mean, he's just great. In fact, the entire team is great. You know, I was mentioning about the people who worked here, Nikki Kreis, who started with us, and Papa, you know, they're just great people. You know, they're doing all right.
They're doing great. They have our Central Pennsylvania bureau pretty much covered. They have a number of counties out there. They cover a huge geographic area, Christina and Nikki, but they do a great job, and we love them.
Yeah. Scott, tell me a little bit about you. You know, where you go to school, when you decide to go into the news media, because just tell me.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Reading, right in downtown Center City, Reading, on South 5th Street near the library, if you're familiar with the city. Went to Central Catholic High School in Reading. I went to LaSalle University in Philadelphia, and I took up communications as a major and marketing as a dual major. But I thought this is what I wanted to do, but I mean, we're talking when I'm in college in the early to mid 1980s, much different landscape in terms of television news around the country and locally. There just weren't 150 TV stations. You know, there were a couple of local affiliates in every market, and if you were fortunate to maybe have a cable outlet somewhere, that was really all there was. So I didn't really harbor any illusions that this was the business I was going to get into, and I got a supremely, amazingly lucky break coming out of college. Knew somebody who knew somebody and got me a job with a little cable outfit in Allentown, Service Electric Cable, that did a nightly newscast and needed a reporter. And I got the job because of the connection. And from there on, I've just kind of surfed my way through.
And you did very well at it. Was there someone in your, you know, when you were in college or in high school that you admired that was on television that you respected?
Well, I grew up, you know, in the Philadelphia media market, so the anchors down there, certainly Jim Gardner, who's at WPVI and is there to this day, is legendary. Larry Kane in the Philadelphia market was probably one of the hardest working journalists really ever anywhere. And with such a varied background. But those guys, sure. I mean, Philadelphia local TV news when I was growing up was a big deal. I mean, those people were, they were big deals. And, you know, I'm sure things have changed. I'm not down in that market anymore. But, you know, those are two guys right off the top. And there's some great journalists who still work down there whose work I admire.
Well, it's interesting because when you started, you were also a meteorologist, right?
Well, not a trained meteorologist. I did do some weather. I did weather at the ABC affiliate in Harrisburg for 3 years back in the days before, you know, a meteorology degree was really something you needed to do. I mean, there were still weather presenters back then, and I was maybe one of the last ones ever. And I learned a lot about meteorology doing it. You know, I certainly had to study up on the science and learn a few things. but I was miscast in that role. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. I'm kind of a newsman at heart, but I could do it, and I could get a paycheck doing it, so I did it for a couple of years.
Now, when you started, okay, you were hired in '99 here, okay?
Here, yeah, at NEP.
And we were talking. I didn't know Paul Stuber hired you,
Yeah.
okay? Now, Paul was a personal friend of mine, and we work with NEP, still do as much as we could, work back and forth with you guys. But when he started, we talked about different things. But you have your Talkback, okay?
Right.
And he used to have letters to coming in, the news director, and he read good ones and bad ones, etc. And this one letter was a nasty letter. Your news is terrible. And this, and you're also fat. And he read this on air, right? So he's reading. And he says, "Well, okay, I know the news," and he explained that. And then he got up from his chair and he stood up and he looked at himself and he says, "I am fat." I mean, that was the kind of personality Paul. What do you learn from people like Paul and people that you've admired? Okay, I always look at the successful people in our business, when it comes to talk show. Of course, the talk shows today are changed so much. But what do you look for in a person when you're, trying to develop and every day you want to, like Jack Palance used to say, "Sam, every time you do a show, try to do it 10% better than the last one."
Right.
How do you do that?
Well, that's a lofty goal to aspire to, 10% better than the last one. Our shows, a two-part question, I'll answer the last part first. Our shows are very much dictated on the content of what the news is that day. I mean, some days the newscast is just fabulous from top to bottom. There's a lot going on. There are interesting stories. There's great stories to tell about people and parts of our community, and they're all over the 19 counties that we serve. And then there's some days that just isn't the case. And some days, we're struggling and we're looking for stories. And there's stories to be found. There's always stories to be found. But maybe the news that day is not as interesting. And you have to, we have very good producers and reporters who can tell great stories and try to make it better than maybe it would be at face value. So we do aspire to that. As far as great people like Paul Stuber, he was, and we're speaking about him in the past tense because he has passed away sadly. Just a great newsman, And when you talk about why WNEP is where it is today, it's because of guys behind the scenes like Paul Stuber, like Bob Absher, who I'm sure you crossed paths with over the years. These are guys that viewers at home don't see, but they were just titans of this market, this news market, and really laid the groundwork and put in the functions that we still abide by today that keep our news, obviously in my opinion, a top-notch product.
When you started back in '99, okay, but with up here, okay, we've seen so many things change in the news since 1999. And so how is presenting the news today different than when you first started? And what do you think of the way the mainstream media is going in news today?
Well, the difference is obviously, I think the social mediaization of the news, and that's a double-edged sword. We have so much more ability to get video from the scene of an incident. Here's shots of this fire that burned down an entire block in this poor community because somebody across the street had a cell phone and took video and sent it to us. So we can show you that, as opposed to us hearing there's a fire, having to drive an hour to get there, and seeing a burned out row of homes. We actually see the flames in that. Also, on the other hand, the reaction to what we say and what we do is immediate. I get off the set and there's, I have Twitter messages, I have Facebook messages. You did this wrong. You said that wrong. You're a knucklehead. As nobody writes letters to the news director anymore. They
go right to you.
They go right to me, and they go right to me immediately. Boom, 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 boom. Send.
Yeah.
So that has changed. As far as the mainstream media, I think the bashing of the mainstream media is agenda driven. It's a profit-making venture for some provocateurs on the national scene. the words fake news are thrown around with such frequency that they've lost what the true meaning is, and that is that, you know, fake news by definition is someone knows a story is fake, puts it out there into the public forum for their own personal, whether it be profit, whether it be agenda driven, for their own personal motives, and then it gets picked up and circulated. And that's what the intent was all along. But you know, if a major network comes out and reports, and they all make mistakes, they all do. Some of them own up to their mistakes, some of them not as much. That's not fake news, that's a mistake, and they need to own up to that and correct it, and, you know, say what the problem was. I think the mainstream media gets a bit of a bad rap, and just the whole topic of the mainstream media. What is it? I don't think anybody can even define what is and what isn't.
Okay, so how much, you know, like as a talk show, I could express, like, for example, I'm very pro-life. I mean, there's no question about it, but I do give Planned Parenthood, if they have an opportunity, they want to come on the show, they're invited. Okay, I have my opinions, okay, as a talk show. But I think as a news anchor, okay, my opinion should not be brought into that.
Right, yeah.
Okay, I think what you need to do is, excuse me, I think anyone should present, you know, facts. And whether whether you're a Democrat or Republican, independent or whatever it is, I don't think you should bring that to the table when you're a news or you're presenting news, okay?
Right.
And I think we've seen a lopsided thing in the last few years in the presidential election, okay? And whether you're for or against Trump, it doesn't make any difference. How much of that in you have your mindset on something, you have your own philosophy. Does that trickle down into the news sometimes where you want to just give it a little shot?
You know, I hope not. I mean, I'm human, we're all human, and the way you think is the way you think. When you say your political affiliation shouldn't be a part of it at all, I proudly say that I'm a registered independent. I have no political leanings either way. You know, does that stuff leak down into? Am I such a centrist that the centrist leanings somehow seep into my reporting? Maybe I'm naive if I would say, oh, no chance. I think it's probably inevitable. You know, it shouldn't be there in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, so Scott Schaffer, you've gained your reputation because people trust you.
I hope so.
Okay, and it's just like, you know, and I'm humble to say this. I mean, you know, mostly the seniors who watch my show and trust what I say. I feel if I misled them, I would be doing a great injustice. I think as a news anchor, and the reputation you've created, you've established that over the years. With that being said, there are things that sometimes you have to say or bring on the news that you're not really happy with, okay? How does that affect you?
It doesn't at all. It's, you know, I signed up for this. I report the news. I don't, you know, my thoughts are only, is this a good news story? Is this a true news story? Is this a news story that is important and interesting to the viewers that we serve? And that's it. Okay. The personal views are, put a good show on the air. If the whole show is something that would appeal to right-wing viewers, or the whole show is something that appeals to left-wing viewers, I don't think that way. I just want to put a good show on the air.
Okay. So, folks, I'm talking to Scott Schaffer. You see him every day on WNEP, the #1 news station, Newswatch. We're very happy to we'll work with them when we can. And we come back. What does he do when he gets there? Okay, and does he have a say in saying, well, we're not going to do this story? How do they determine their stories? And sometimes some areas feel like they're being neglected. Okay, they're not covering stories the way they should. Why does that happen? We could go on for 2 hours, but we'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the Sam Lesante Show, folks. Remember, 24/7, you can watch all of our local produced programs on ssptv.com. And don't forget, folks, Download the app. All of the shows are on the app, SSP TV. Just search SSP TV and you can get all the information on local television programming. Speaking of local television programming, local news, greater northeastern Pennsylvania news, Scott Schaffer joins me today. He's the news anchor, as you know, on WNEP. You can see him 6, 7, 10, 11, and maybe even in your dreams, okay? Scott, once again, thanks for coming on the Sam Lesante Show. Okay, so Scott, we have, you said you have a vast area that you cover, okay?
Huge.
So how do you, yes, it is huge, okay? So now how do you determine what stories? For example, there's sometimes people in a certain town they call NEP and they want you to cover a story, but you don't cover that because whatever, okay? How do you determine this?
Well, there's a lot of different determinations. I mean, I won't lie and say geography doesn't play a role. I mean, if something is happening in the farthest reach of our viewing area, it is sometimes difficult for us to get to. And so I feel for the folks who live in those far reaches that don't get as much coverage. I grew up in the city of Reading, as I said, which is the farthest outpost of the Philadelphia television market. We never got local news, ever. In those days, it would come to Reading, never. So I feel your pain, I really do. But we judge, again, the news stories, are they interesting? Are they true? Are they factual? Are they something that impacts people that will be watching the news? And maybe not just in a small community, but in a broader sense. So, we have to be careful about local politics. So-and-so, the mayor of small town USA is shady. You got to come look at him. We hear that a lot about pretty much everyone. So, we have to kind of weed that stuff out and determine what should be covered, what needs to be covered, and what doesn't.
Well, before I get to your meetings, you have a great guy in Bowman. I mean, Dave is the investigator.
Dave Bowman, yeah.
Dave
Wonderful.
He's top shelf. I mean,
Yeah.
and he does his homework. It's, like I said, you have a great team, okay? So you're going to go, when you go in today, okay, what do you do?
Get in about 2:30, go into our afternoon news meeting right away, where we go over the stories that are being covered or have been covered. That's usually for the evening shows, for the 5, 6, 7. And then we discuss what we're going to cover with the night crews for 10 and 11. That meeting takes usually about 30 minutes. And then it's a matter of...
Who's in that meeting?
The reporters for the night, it's usually Sarah Bynofsky and Peggy Lee. The producers for the night, Emily, Ashley, Joe, whoever's producing the 7, 10, and 11. And the assistant news director, Jen Wade, is in that meeting, and the anchors, Charlotte and I, are in that meeting. Mm-hmm. So it's roughly 8 or 9 of us.
So as they're discussing the stories for the day, okay, so first of all, they had to get information to cover those stories.
Right.
Now, did they say at this particular meeting, we want to cover this, we want to cover that, or it's already been covered, and can you say, well, I don't think we should do this, and I think we should? Do you have any input?
Oh, I certainly have input. I don't have the final say, but I certainly have
Who
input.
has the final say?
Well, there's the news director, assistant news director, executive producer, and the producers themselves. They have the final say. I certainly have some input. I mean, I've been there a long time, so there's some deference to experience and stories that should be covered, should not be covered. But we all have some input, and it's a community discussion.
So your major news stories come from either people sending you news releases, what's happening, or you reading various social media or papers. Is this the way it works?
Well, the reporters work by this, geographic beats. So, for instance, there's a reporter in Lackawanna County, and that's all she does. Mm-hmm. So she has all kinds of sources. There's reporters in the Wyoming Valley. There's a reporter down in the southern tier of Luzerne County, Lower Luzerne. So they kind of know what's going on, and they bring their ideas really to the newsroom, and then the newsroom discusses them all and sees which ones. And some of those ideas do come from social media. Some come from press releases or phone calls or tips, or just keeping an eye on the court docket, what's going on every day.
Now, verification is always important, because sometimes someone can give you a call and say this has just happened, and before you just have breaking news, you need to verify it, right? And how does that work, to make sure that you're verifying that it's true? Because for you to come on the next day, we made a mistake, we shouldn't have said this, that's...
Yeah, that's the worst, to have to correct mistakes, and it does happen, and we have to do it.
Yeah.
the verification process is it's different for every story. I mean, people in authority are usually the first steps. Police, did this really happen? The district attorney, are there really charges filed? Things like that. So we don't just go ever on what we hear from someone who just calls the newsroom or emails us.
Now, the fun part of this is that it seems that you guys have a lot of fun with your talkback. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, how did this talkback thing happen?
I think it goes back to the 90s. I think somebody thought maybe I don't. It predates me. It goes back even possibly earlier than that. And it's just such a quirky local treasure. It really is, and it's gotten us so much notoriety nationally. Most recently on HBO with the whole thing with the train. I don't know how to explain it. It's one of those things that, if you propose that now, someone would laugh you out of the room.
Yeah.
Especially in this day of social media.
Yeah.
You call in, we record your call, and then we play your call in the air. It's really a throwback, but it's just such a successful part of us. And it's, newspapers have tried it, other, electronic media have tried it. It hasn't been duplicated, not around here.
So now the other thing is, before we get to you personally, how do you determine? Because if you're getting all these calls, the listeners say, we're not doing this because they criticize that. No, we're not going to play this. Let's play this one because they're giving us praise. How do you determine which ones?
We play plenty of calls that criticize us.
Oh, I know that.
We like that. I mean, it's and some that praise us. The calls that praise us, I don't think there's much fun. I like to hear the ones that criticize us because sometimes they have a legitimate point. No doubt about it. We're not above being criticized, and how does it? There's a person or two who go through the calls, and sometimes it's a big job. Sometimes there's, when there's issues, there could be 150 calls in 24 hours.
Yeah.
And to narrow that down to somewhere between 3 and.
Who determines which calls are going on?
There's a producer for the 5 o'clock, a producer for the 6 o'clock, and the executive producer, and they kind of tag team it. And I'm not exactly.
Do you have
sure.
any say in that?
Not at all. I used to when I did the earlier newscasts.
Yeah.
But I don't. I listened to those calls for years and picked the calls. I did.
So now when you look at your persona, Scott Schaffer, I'm the news director here, and there's channels. But I mean, you got that that look, but you're a funny guy.
Well,
you're a funny guy. I mean, because I see your reaction sometimes to talks back, and sometimes it's entertaining. I don't think you mean to be insulting to the person that are calling, but you address it in a different way. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you ever take a personal offense when someone says, Scott, you sucked on this. You should have done this, and you guys are crazy. You ever take a personal offense?
I've heard that so many times that I don't no more than I take the hey, we really love what you do as some kind of effusive praise. You put your face on the public airwaves, as you well know. There's going to be people who are going to like you no matter how terrible you are. There's going to be people who hate you no matter how good you are.
Exactly.
So you just I certainly appreciate when people have kind words for me, and if someone has unkind words for me, it rarely ever bothers me. It just, sorry, sorry you see it that way, kind of thing.
So you're on my show, and I'm asking the questions I think. Okay, so that I think the general public would like to hear. How you put things together behind the scenes. When you're out in the public, and they see Scott Schaffer, I know what happens to Debbie and I, but what are some of the things that people come up to you and they say to you?
Oh, I love Joe Snedeker. Most people talk about something recent, like anything from, how about that story last night about the fire, or right down to, how was that taste test? How did that pizza taste last night? Mm-hmm. It could be anything. It's usually people who are watching, and there's something that sticks in their mind that they want to talk about, and it's not always something good. They could be like, I don't like the story you did on XYZ state representative. I don't think that was fair. Mm-hmm. I'm never going to watch you again because of what you said about him or her. Mm-hmm. That happens. But the interactions are 95% positive.
Yeah, I think the thing is that when you're presenting the news, and when we hired like Nikki Kreis and anyone we ever hired, I always tell them to watch different news broadcasts, because, the Vegas thing, I mean, that's news, but all the stations had it. What makes a different station different in presenting that news. I think that's where Paul Stuber really was excelled in, okay, and your directors, news directors, that brings that, well, we have to go to 16 to watch that,
Right.
okay? But it's a fire, but it's a different way you approach it. So how do you do that? I mean, what is it that you do differently? I don't want to give any secrets out.
No,
but I mean,
there's not a secret at all.
yeah.
Tell it from the people's perspective, the people who are affected, not what the mayor says, not what the fire chief says. Tell from the people on the ground, the people who live there, the people who live next door, the people who saw it and helped pull the old lady from the first floor. Those are the stories that need to be told. It's not what the official word is important and needs to be reported, but the story is the people who are affected.
all right, we've got about a minute left. So Scott, what do you think? How do you think the news is going to continue to go on? What do you think the future is? When I say future, it's not like 5 years. I'm talking about a year because things happen so fast.
yeah.
What do you think is going to happen in our news industry today?
I wish I knew. I never would have foreseen the changes I've seen over the last 15 years. It's obviously that's more fractured with the audience and how many different channels they have to watch, how many different options they have on social media or just online to get their news. We're going to have to roll with whatever changes are coming. We're going to have to roll with them to survive. We've been successful so far, and hope that continues.
Well, Scott, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. Really,
it's always a pleasure, and we really enjoy. My daughter I know my daughter works with you guys, and we really enjoy working with you guys. You guys are really first class.
We
okay?
enjoy working with you, Sam. Thank you.
Scott Schaffer, folks. Remember, he's on. Now you got to watch the Sam Lesante show. So when he's on at 7, sometimes. Watch him at 10 or 11, he's the news anchor, as you know, on WNEP, a great station, folks. Top 3 in the country, so they got to be doing something right. We'll see you next time.